Good evening, listeners. It's me, your host, Ramblingramm. I'm here with some more stories to scare, shock, and horrify you. Or possibly, just possibly, let you know what's really out there in the dark. Enjoy, listeners. Video Game Addict by the Odd Cat Lady. I think we've all gone a little crazy over a video game. We'd say we would play a game for maybe an hour or two, and before you know it, you've not only missed lunch, you've also missed dinner, and there's a Cheeto dust stain around your mouth, and it's past midnight. That was probably a little real for some of you. It's okay. We've all done it. I mean, not me. Not anymore. I learned my lesson the hard way. I don't let myself play more than 30 minutes a day for any video game. I don't snack. I definitely do not play close to bedtime. It's all because of the morning calls. My brother and I had an N64 back in the 90s. It was wicked sweet. My dad bought it for my birthday on the grounds I had to share it with Nick, but that was okay. I'm not gonna lie, I think my dad partially got it for himself as well. He really liked to play games with us. It was a nice way to kick back and relax after a day at the office, he said once during a Mario Kart match. He never won, but I think he did that on purpose. Didn't want to make his sons think they suck. Even if Nick ended up driving backwards more often than not. My dad always wanted us to feel like he was into what we were into, and what we were into was new games. We ended up getting some of the newest games right when they released, as long, of course, that we kept our rooms clean, and that we kept our grades up. It was a fair enough trade. It was the third day of summer vacation. My brother and I were viciously racing it out over the last cookie in Mario Kart, when my dad came in with a game that I'd never heard about before. The Morning Court. My dad explained that he had gotten the game from a friend, that he'd picked it up at a store for cheap, and got home only to find out that his kid had accidentally spilled a cup of fruit punch in his console. Yeah, there was no coming back from that. So rather than let a perfectly good game go to waste, he gave it to my dad. The Morning Court actually had a really nice cartridge, pristine condition. The front depicted a man with a silver scepter sitting on a glowing throne. It was a strategy game that could have up to 2 players. It would split down the centre as the players managed their kingdoms. I'm not going to go out of my way to say the graphics were amazing. In fact, they were god-awful. But it didn't matter, because the gameplay more than made up for that. It was all about strategy. Run your kingdom. Make sure you're growing enough food to keep your people fed, and then conquer all that's in your way, including your obnoxious little sibling. But oddly enough, despite the amount of strategy involved with it, it was a really easy game to get a handle on. Easy to play, difficult to master. There was even a storyline, even if I can only remember bits and pieces. This was over 20 years ago. You and the optional second player were the sons of a king that sent you from his side, forcing you to live on your own and make your own way in the world with a few serfs and knights. The land your father lives in is beautiful, with an unlimited supply of food, and you'd never have to worry about disease or death. I'm not sure why the 2 sons were competing with each other, but since that only really applied to 2-player mode, I don't think that was technically canon. It was great though. Gotta kick your dad's ass for disowning you from the throne and get back the kingdom that's rightfully yours. The amount of detail put into this game though. I personally liked seeing how far I could push the serfs without them revolting or dying. If I gave them less food, I could focus on giving more to my knights and soldiers. That way I could conquer more land faster. It was all about balance. If you worked them too hard, they'd die of exhaustion. If you didn't give them enough food, they'd starve. Give them too much of both, though, and they'd start to think a bit too much for themselves. I learned that the hard way my first solo playthrough. The people dragged me from the throne and had me drawn and quartered. My mum would have thrown a fit if she'd seen that scene. The game legit showed my character being hung, before what I think were his bits being chopped off, his guts ripped out, head chopped off and body torn to shreds. I mean, even with the graphics of the day, it was, well, graphic. There were a lot of things my mum wouldn't have approved of. I had to stop my brother from getting up to ask my mum what it meant when his prince got the report that his men successfully raped and pillaged a village of an opposing country. I knew enough that if my mum found out what was happening in our game, she would definitely take it away, and we didn't want that. It was sometimes fun getting game overs, given what horrible things you could see. My prince was hanged, had a hot poker shoved up his ass, beheaded, boiled alive, impaled. I could go on. Of course, you could also trigger those little cutscenes by doing these to your people. Unfortunately, I only found that out like weeks after I got the game, so you can imagine how many times I purposely got myself executed, just to see how gruesome it could get. I think it's safe to say I was addicted to playing the Morning Court. If I wasn't playing the save file I was working on with Kyle, I was playing my personal one. The N64 was in my room, so I could stay up late to play. I just had to make sure the sound was low. Not completely off though. I don't think I mentioned this, but the soundtrack? One of the most beautiful I've ever heard. The more I played, the more I wanted to. I figured out what terrible things I could do in the game, and I lived for it. I once killed off one of my villagers for funsies. They hadn't even done anything wrong, I was just bored. I sent my knights in and the whole place was lit on fire. No one made it out alive. 2 of my knights spit roasted a man while he was alive, and roasted him over the bodies of what were probably his family and friends. I almost stopped playing after that day. That scene gave me literal nightmares. But I wanted to see how far I could go. My addiction story was probably typical. Sleep? Why would I sleep when I could play the Morning Court? I was so close to conquering this new country. Eat? I could have some potato chips and a cookie while plotting how to poison my second wife. I didn't need to come to the table. Take a shower and get clean? But I could be playing my game. I was working with my spy network on plotting a neighbouring king's assassination. Play outside? Fuck that. I wanted to play the Morning Court. Outside was boring. Of course, Mum did force me to go out sometimes. She wasn't down for my shit. But I wouldn't run around in the backyard or go see what my friends were up to. I'd just sort of lay on the ground and stare at the sky, counting down the seconds until I could play one of the best games in the entire universe. However, that is no excuse for what I did. Nick and I were close, even if he was 2 years younger than me. I thought he was just a baby. We liked playing the Morning Court together, at least at first. But then we came to realise that this game could only have one winner. That drove the rift between us. The fact that only one of us could inherit the king's throne. There was no tie. There was no peaceful ending. We'd have to betray each other sooner or later. We began to snap at each other for any little thing, in and out of the game. I'd lock my door so he couldn't get in and play at night, try to sabotage my game. I didn't cheat. I knew if he caught me, he'd rat to Mum all the fucked up shit going on in this game. If he couldn't win, neither could I. In-game, it was a delicate balance of cooperating with each other, while expecting the other to stab you in the back when you least expected it. It all came to a head about a month or so after we got the game. We'd been pretty cold with each other that day already. I was suspecting a spy in my ranks, and Nick was the shittiest liar. He always rubbed his nose when he was lying. So when I did root out that spy and it turns out he was from Nick's country, I exploded. I asked him what he was doing, that this was an act of treason, that I could declare war over this. Nick just looked at me, shrugged and said, "I'll tell Mum if you go to war with me." Everything went red after that. I remember grabbing my brother by the head. I remember him screaming. I remember hitting his head against the wall at least 5 times before my mum barged in and began to scream. No, I didn't kill Nick, but I did beat him into a pulp. If Mum hadn't been home, I would have probably killed him. Mum and Dad did something that definitely saved my life. They sent me to the hospital to clear out my head. It was that bad. I was angry at first. I'd pretend I was sorry and beg for my game back, and when I realised I wasn't getting it back, I'd throw a tantrum. I think I peed on a nurse. I'm not proud to admit it, but I did. After the anger came the pain. My doctors compared my withdrawal to that of someone coming off heroin. My body ached. I had migraine so bad my head felt like it was going to explode. I couldn't keep any food down. I was constantly running to the toilet to vomit. Have you ever vomited on an empty stomach? It's not pretty. It hurts like hell. Chills, fever, cramps, and the nothing moments. The nothing moments were the hours I'd stare at the ceiling, my eyes flicking back and forth. Occasionally I'd burst into hysterical giggles, and when asked what I was laughing about, I'd say something about the game. I was reliving some of the best moments, replaying the game over and over again in my mind. It took me 2 weeks to get my head on straight, and that's when the doctors finally sat me down and told me I'd be going to live with my aunt and uncle out of state. It had happened 3 days after I'd gone to the hospital. Nick was fine, he just looked like hell, but my parents decided it was time to lock up the N64. My addiction was so bad it was literally ruining my life, and Dad promised he'd get it back down when Nick cleaned his room. Nick didn't want to clean his room though. He wanted to play the morning court. My brother's addiction was quieter. Sure, he'd go through the day like it wasn't on his mind, but it was. I know. Every moment of the day Nick was considering what to do next time he booted up the game. He'd function, unlike me, but it was like being a robot. He did the bare minimum to seem like there wasn't a problem, and every moment he'd be wanting to go back to playing that fucking game. So that night, Nick got my father's gun and killed both of my parents. When some of my parents' friends came over the next morning to give them a shoulder to cry on, they found the blood-spattered Nick playing the morning court. I cried. I never got a chance to say a real goodbye. I told them I hated them as they took me off to get treatment, that I hoped they'd rot in hell. My mum slapped my mouth for that one. Not gonna lie, I deserved that. If I could do anything in this world, it'd be to go back in time and tell them I loved them. My uncle and aunt were anti-technology, which was probably for the best. I didn't need any more video games. I didn't play any until I moved out and went to college, where my roommate showed me his and asked if I wanted to play. I set my rules back then. I've been keeping them well until now. I've been an addict in the past. It's shitty. That game, it was something else. I don't know if it was my easily influenced kid brain or what, but I truly felt controlled by the morning court, which I found again this morning. It had been shoved away in a box, packed up. It looks as brand new as ever. My stomach groaned when I was examining it, but even then I found myself plugging in that dusty N64 and finding out that not only did it still work, but my save file was still there. Graphics are even more laughable now, but the music's still amazing, and the gameplay still outshines games even from today. I thought I only put about an hour into the new file. I looked outside. The sun's rising. I started playing after dinner last night, but maybe just 10 more minutes and I can be done. I'm about to conquer the capital of the country I'm at war with. My experiences working in a convenience store. By the Bacon Gamer 21. I've worked at this local convenience store for about 7 years, and in those 7 years, I've had a couple creepy and otherwise weird experiences. Most of the weirder or creepier stuff usually happens during the night shift, which is what I usually end up working. Go figure. I thought it'd be a good idea to come on here and just post some of the more interesting experience. I'd say there'll be more posts beside this one. Anyway, here goes. My first weird experience happened around a year after I started. I was working 8 PM till 3 AM, and around 10:30, a group of 4 guys walked into the store, all wearing dark black hoodies. They went to the back of the store, where I couldn't see them, and just stayed there for the longest time. After about 25 minutes, I decided to ask if they needed any help finding anything, and one of them responded no. Then they stayed back there for another 20 minutes. They walked up to the register, and the lead guy set 4 of those 26-ounce things of salt on the counter. I ended up doing that awful half-joking smile talk about the customers' items while ringing them up that most cashiers at any store do. And so I said, guess you guys needed some salt, huh? The guy responded with a hesitant, yeah, sure. Then he paid and they all 4 left. I guess it wasn't quite that weird, but I did notice that all 4 of the guys had blood coming out of both nostrils, and they all smelled like what I would describe as rotten meat. I've never seen them again to this day. Then there was once, when I was mopping in the men's room, I heard what sounded like someone tapping on the toilet in the very last stall. I looked under the space between the door and floor, and didn't see anyone in there, but the tapping persisted. I opened the stall door, since it wasn't locked. Right when I did, the tapping stopped. I figured maybe I was imagining it, so I went back to mopping, when I heard the tapping start again. I went back to check it out, and it stopped. This time I decided to check the toilet for anything that could be causing the taps, and nothing. Shortly after I went back to mopping again, I heard a little girl giggle. It came from the last stall. After that I just noped the fuck out of there, and refused to do any cleaning alone in the men's room for a couple of weeks after. That still creeps me out 6 years later. Another time, I was taking the trash out back to throw in the dumpster, around 1 AM. I noticed a cat sitting by the dumpster. I expected it to run away when I got closer, but it didn't. It just sat there, really still. I could tell it was breathing. It was just being really still. I tossed the garbage in the dumpster and went back into the store. Before I went back inside, I turned to see if the cat was still there. And it was. Hadn't moved an inch. Still staring straight ahead. I went in and told the other cashier working at the time about it. He said, "Oh yeah, it's always out there around this time. We all usually ignore it." He paused and asked me if I touched it. I told him that I didn't. He told me that whatever I did, do not touch the cat under any circumstances. I asked him why, but he wouldn't tell me any more about it. He quit about 2 years back, and up until he quit, he would never tell me anything else about why I shouldn't touch the cat. I did hear from someone else that once, someone who'd worked there before me tried petting the cat one night, and never came back in from taking the garbage out. Nobody ever heard from the guy again. This one's a little more recent, as it happened a couple of months ago. I was working my normal 8 PM to 3 AM shift, and it had gotten really slow around 2:30. So I just sat back in a chair behind the register counter and started playing some Plague Inc. on my phone. And the typical music playing over the intercom was interrupted with staticky, garbled noise, and then a distorted deep voice speaking gibberish in a fast tone. I actually openly said, "What the fuck?" when it happened. And this noise continued for a full 5 minutes, before switching back to the song that was playing, Easy Lover by Phil Collins. I wish I would have thought to record it with a voice recorder on my phone or something, but I didn't. Gotta love hindsight. Once, about 4 years ago, a guy came in and came straight to the counter. I asked him what I could do for him, and he grinned really wide and asked for 2 packs of Marlboro 72s. I got them and rung him up and asked for his ID. He handed it to me, and it all seemed alright, but under his birth date it just said N/A. I asked him why it said that, and he said that it's because he didn't feel comfortable giving that information when having the ID made, all the while still grinning. I just overrided it and let him pay and be on his way, since the constant grinning was so unsettling. As he was about to leave, I told him to have a nice night. He turned to me and said, "Oh, don't you worry, I will," while still grinning, and he backed out of the store and seemed to disappear once out of my sight. Alright, I think this is where I'll end this post. I've got a couple of good stories, but I don't want to put them all in this post, otherwise it'll just be bogged down with story after story after story. I Won't Have It by Natcher88. My friend Donald was murdered recently. The officials said it was a murder, but the locals knew what happened. Growing up in northern Alaska, Don and I would often make our way through the thick wilderness, exploring and playing. The village elders were always superstitious of the old Inuit legends that surrounded the woods. They always warned us about the woods, never to go in alone. Always take some sort of weapon to protect the group you have. And always respect the woods. Everyone knew Donald was killed by a Wendigo, It was obvious. It had to be. There's no other explanation. They never found the body, and everyone in town was close to each other. The only people who could possibly be suspects would be some of the trappers and hunters that came through, but they never paid us any attention. It had to be a Wendigo. I won't have it. I'd gathered my hunting rifle, parka and snow pants, and some days' worth of rations and a flint and steel. I made my way to the edge of the village. I could barely hear the sound of few people asking me where I was going, but my determination overcame me. I won't have it. The officials who tracked Donald as much as they could said the trail led to Colville River, but ran cold. I made my way into the thick, snow-covered underbrush, pushing the branches past, trying to move as fast as I could. I could just barely see the crest of the hill through the pines. Trudging through the knee-high snow, my shoulders swinging to pull myself forward, I could only keep one thing on my mind: the idea of the disgusting creature that took his life. Determination filled me, but the cold was already setting in. Coats and layers can only do so much against the wilderness and the setting sun. As I pushed my way to the crest, I pushed my way through the foliage and took in what I could. There were definitely tracks on the ground. One set looked more like what a human could create. Large, drawn out, scraping the snow along as they could get their legs over the drifts, pushing up to their knees. There was a second set, definitely bipedal, but walking with what could only be described as a deliberate gait. Each step was meticulous, as if it was stalking prey, but wasn't ready to show itself yet. Clearing out a patch for a fire, I decided to gather kindling and make a camp for the night. As I pulled twigs from the trees, I couldn't shake from my mind the idea of Don being stalked by this beast in the wilderness. The more I contemplated it, the angrier I became, ripping down pieces of the branches, spilling the snow from its rest onto myself. I could feel the cold seeping further through me, but my anger and determination pushed it out of my mind. As my fire started to brighten the area around me, and seemed stable enough to be left alone, I sat across from where the paths left into the woods, brooding under my hood, imagining the beast I planned to kill. The fire licked at my boot, but I could barely feel it through my anger. I ran through in my head every encounter I thought I could have with the beast. I did not sleep. It will not survive me. I won't have it. By the time the sun started to rise, my fire was barely embers, but I was just as awake as before. I stomped the fire out and made my way into the underbrush once again. The snow and trees were barely making a difference. The night had given me plenty of time to steam under my hatred, and my motivation moved me more than the snow and pines could hold me back. The only thing I truly noticed was the cold that had crept farther into my skin. This bone-chilling cold kept me from being able to feel the snow and branches pushing against me. I could barely see straight. The only thing I could focus on were the Wendigo tracks. I finally made my way to the God-blessed river. I could see the river from a small plateau overlooking a snow-covered field that continued after this body of water. I saw no tracks except the monsters. I wasn't tracking anything else anyways. Nothing else mattered. I decided to set up my camp at this ridge and started stripping the trees again, looking to the river often. Feeling a sense of paranoia start to push its way into my bones, along with the cold and darkness. Nothing would light. This damned forest and this damned flint. I looked back at the river where the disgusting tracks led down to. I could see nothing except those tracks, those goddamn tracks. I screamed into the wilderness and threw my pack down the side of the plateau in a fit of rage and frustration. I barely recognized the sound that came from my throat, but everything felt more cold than before. When I looked up, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the river on the opposite side. There he was. This disgusting abomination of this disgusting terrain decided to spawn from the depths of some hell. His head was covered by the skull of a stag, pulled down to show the whole top face, and its antlers were adorned with some bits of flesh. Long, dark, oily strands of hair flowed out from under the skull onto its bony, sinewy shoulders. Its whole body was an unnatural shade of blue, just noticeable to set him apart from something that can be considered alive, if that could be applied to such a creature. The body looked as if it was pulled apart, towering this beast to something of 9 feet tall. Every part of the body seemed to be pulled and stretched. Even its fingers were elongated to the point where it looked as though the bones were pushing through the tips, creating red-stained claws with bits of flesh around the edges. I couldn't see anything beyond its skull mask, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. The only warmth I've felt since I've been out here. It felt wrong, like it burned into my soul and my very being. My vision started to become blurry at the edges. I could hear voices trying to talk to me. Nothing they said I could understand. Some were familiar, but one roared above the rest, even though it only whispered into my ears. The Wendigo tilted its head as the whispers became louder. The only thing I remember is ripping my gun around my side and firing towards it. The roar of the rifle snapped me back into reality. The Wendigo was gone. I couldn't let it get away like this. I won't have it. I jumped down the slope of the plateau to the river and jumped through the water. The river was low, but the water chilled me to the core. I could feel nothing but the anger I placed on the head of this beast. Once I made it to the other side, I saw his tracks leading off to a cave by the side of the river. I must have wounded it with my arrow, the gun, whatever it was. John would finally be avenged. Was it Don? James? It doesn't matter. This monster would be dead soon and everything would be right. I ran to the mouth of the cave, tore around the side of the rocks, gritting my teeth, and saw nothing. There was nothing there. I started to look through the cave for all that I was worth. My vision was blurring at the edges. I could see things, people, something moving around in the blur, but I couldn't seem to focus on it. I could see a trail of blood on the ground, and a body in the cave. It looked familiar, but it was human. It mattered about as much as a dead deer. Beside the body's head was a stag's skull sitting on a stone. Stuck on the antlers of the skull were photos. Photos of some group of filthy trappers stabbing James, John, whatever. This couldn't have been it. This couldn't have been it. They killed him. They killed him. All of them. I won't have it. I won't have it. I reached my hands out to the skull, my coat arms ripped off from the low-hanging foliage and the slide down the plateau and moving through the river. This useless forest took everything I had. I lost everything out here. I haven't eaten in days and my hand showed it. The bony, lacerated, frost-bitten hands reached towards the skull. I wasn't able to tell if I was in control anymore. It didn't matter though. This damn forest took my sanity. The cold had pulled the colour and feeling from the hands that lifted the skull up towards my head. I won't have it. They killed him. I won't have them. The skull was placed over my face. I felt nothing but cold surrounding a writhing ball of anger within my chest. The mask filtered the world around me. Even the cave walls were here to show me where I belonged. Looking back towards the carcass on the ground next to me, I realized I was quite hungry. I dug my bleeding fingers through the clothing into the flesh, pulling and tearing anything that would come off towards my salivating maw. It was as though I was watching through the eyes of another creature, but it didn't feel wrong. Everything was right. Nothing moves. I moved to stop things that should not move. Everything made sense again, and made more with each bite into the flesh of this trespasser. I won't have it. I will kill him. I will have them. Well, listeners, I sincerely hope you enjoyed the tales that I brought you this evening. It would be a great pleasure to me if you would like, comment, and subscribe, if you're not already a subscriber. And please wait for me to bring you more tales to alter your perception of how the world may really be. This is Ramblingramm, signing off. Good night, listeners, and sweet dreams.